In the cattle towns of Old Texas, a marshal could take your six-shooter the moment your boots hit the boardwalk. Abilene, Dodge City, Fort Worth, they all hung signs ordering trail hands to check their guns before the first saloon. So cowboys kept their real irons somewhere else. Out at the ranch, tucked in the saddle shed behind the tack and horse blankets, sat the guns a Texas cattleman never surrendered. Some were banned in town, some were banned by the state, and a few were hardware no lawman wanted to see at all. Number 19 started more range wars than any gun in the West, and number 3 was so feared, a ranger captain ordered every last one seized. Hit subscribe, and let's count down the 25 outlawed guns the cattleman kept hidden in the saddle shed. Number 25. The volcanic pistol carried a strange, doomed brilliance into the early Texas ranch, a repeating handgun in a world that still trusted single shots. Cattlemen who came up before the war remembered it as the gun that promised too much. It fed hollow bullets from a tube beneath the barrel, cycled with a lever loop under the grip, and could throw shot after shot when every rival still thumbed powder and ball. By 1856, a few had drifted down into the brush country, prized by men driving longhorns north through Comanche land, where a second chance was worth more than a fine horse. The trouble was the load. The little rocket balls carried almost no powder, and a man could empty the magazine into a wolf and watch it run. Rangers laughed at it. Ranchers hit it anyway, because on the open range, bluff kept more men alive than lead. Number 24. The Pepperbox revolver was the gambler's insurance and the cattleman's last resort, a squat cluster of barrels that spun on a central axis and fired straight down. Cowboys called it the pocket stove because it looked like nothing so much as a small iron furnace. It cost around $8 in the 1850s, cheap enough that a trail boss could tuck one in his coat and never miss the weight. Accuracy was a joke. The barrels sprayed wide, and old hands swore that firing one was the only sure way to hit a man standing anywhere in the county. But in a lantern-lit card game, precision was never the point. The Pepperbox spoke loud and close. Town marshals confiscated them on sight, calling them murder in a matchbox. So the cattlemen buried theirs deep in the saddle shed, a comfort no one admitted owning, but everyone kept. Number 23. The Star Army revolver rode into Texas on the tail of the Civil War, a double-action .44 that thousands of veterans carried west when the fighting ended. Discharged soldiers turned cowhand kept them slung in oiled holsters, and by 1867 the Star was a common sight along the Chisholm Trail. Its trigger did double work, cocking and firing in one long pull, which made it faster than the single actions if a man could master the heavy stroke. Ranchers valued it for the same reason the Army had. It was rugged, it forgave dust and rain, and it kept shooting when finer guns choked on trail grit. But the double-action pull threw men's aim off, and old cowmen distrusted anything that fired before they meant it to. So it went home in the saddlebag, wiped clean, waiting for the night a wolf or a rustler came calling. Number 22. The Colt Walker was a monster of a revolver, 4.5 pounds of iron so heavy a man wore it in a saddle holster because no belt could bear it. Sam Colt built it in 1847 with Texas Ranger Samuel Walker, and it threw a charge so hot it could drop a horse at 100 yards. Cattlemen who inherited them from ranger fathers kept them oiled like heirlooms. The Walker's power was legend, and its danger was real. Overloaded chambers sometimes burst, and men lost fingers to the very gun that made them feel invincible. Only 1,100 were ever made, so by the 1870s, owning one marked a family as old Texas tied to the border fights before the cattle boom. Ranchers hid them not because the law forbade them, but because they were worth a fortune. And a gun that valuable was safer under a floorboard in the saddle shed than on any hip in a saloon. Number 21. The LeMat revolver was the strangest sidearm to ride the Texas range, a 9-shot pistol with a shotgun barrel hidden at its core. A Confederate officer's dream, it let a man fire 8 rounds of pistol ball, then flip a lever on the hammer and unleash a single blast of buckshot from the second barrel below. Cattlemen who carried one after the war treated it like a secret. Rustlers who thought they'd counted a man's shots learned too late that the LeMat had one more. It was heavy, slow to load, and its foreign parts were nearly impossible to replace in a Texas gun shop. But that final barrel, that grape-shot surprise, made it the most feared close-quarters gun a rancher could own. It lived in the shed, loaded and waiting, a whole ambush in a single hand. Number 20. The Spencer repeating rifle handed the cattleman firepower the frontier had never seen, 7 rounds fed through the buttstock and levered out fast enough to break a raid. Union cavalry had proved it in the war, and when the veterans drifted into Texas ranching, the Spencer came with them. By 1868, it was the guardian of the night herd, the gun a man grabbed when the cattle spooked and shadows moved at the edge of the firelight. A cowboy could empty it in under half a minute, then thumb in a fresh tube of cartridges and start again. The ammunition was the weakness. The fat rimfire rounds were scarce in the brush country, and a Spencer without cartridges was just an expensive club. Still, drovers swore a single Spencer could turn back a dozen raiders who expected a slow, single-shot fight. It hung above the shed door, the family's answer to a bad night. Number 19. The Winchester model. 1876 started more range wars than any gun that ever came to Texas, a heavy repeater built to throw big cartridges as fast as a man could work the lever. When the barbed wire went up in the 1880s and the fence-cutting wars tore the open range apart, this was the rifle both sides carried into the dark. Cattlemen who fought to keep the prairie open and ranchers who fenced it closed both trusted the same iron. Chambered for cartridges stout enough to knock a steer flat, the 76 gave a mounted man the reach to hold a fence line or cut one and the speed to do it before the sheriff arrived. Texas made fence cutting a felony in 1884, and any man caught riding the wire with a repeater knew the charge that waited. So the 76 stayed home between raids, greased and hidden, and only came out when the wire went down and the grudges came due. Number 18. The Marlin Model 1881 was the quiet rival to the Winchester, a lever rifle that fed the same powerful cartridges but ejected its spent shells out the side instead of the top. Ranchers prized that small difference. It kept the sight line clear and let a man mount a scope, though few on the range ever did. By the mid-1880s, the Marlin had earned a loyal following among Texas cattlemen who wanted knockdown power without the Winchester's crowd. It could take down a rustler's horse at long range or a wolf raiding the calves, and its solid frame handled the heaviest loads without complaint. Marlin men were a stubborn breed, loyal to a maker most had never met, and they argued its virtues around the fire long into the night. When the town ordinances swept up every long gun a cattleman carried, the Marlin went home with the rest, wrapped in oilcloth against the shed damp, waiting for open country. Number 17. The Smith & Wesson Model 3, American broke Colt's grip on the Texas holster with a trick no cap and ball gun could match. It opened at the hinge and dumped all 6 empties at once. A Cattleman could reload in seconds, while a Colt man was still poking cartridges through a loading gate one at a time. Introduced in the early 1870s, the big top brake was fast, powerful, and expensive, and the ranchers who could afford one carried it like a badge. The Frontier tested its weakness quick. The hinge could loosen under hard trail use, and a sprung latch turned a fine gun to junk. But when it worked, nothing on the range came into action faster. Lawmen and outlaws alike chased the Model 3, and Cattletown marshals confiscated them along with every other belt gun. So the American came home to the saddle shed, its cylinder swung open and empty, the fastest reload in Texas, hidden under a horse blanket. Number 16. The Merwin Hulbert was the gun for a cattleman who wanted his iron to do more than shoot, an elegant revolver that twisted open along the frame to eject its empties while keeping any unfired rounds in the cylinder. Gunsmiths of the 1870s called it the finest machined revolver in America. Its parts fitted so tight a man could feel the quality in his palm. Texas ranchers who carried one guarded it jealously because it was rare, costly, and nearly impossible to repair once something inside it broke. The twist-open action fascinated and frustrated in equal measure. Flawless when new, temperamental when worn. Cowboys who owned one learned its moods like a green Colt. It was never a common trail gun, and that rarity made it a target for thieves as much as marshals. So the Merwin Hulbert stayed off the hip and in the shed, a beautiful, secretive thing, admired far more often than it was ever fired. Number 15. The Colt Buntline Special was the tall tale of the Texas holster, a peacemaker stretched with a barrel long enough to make it half rifle. Legend tied it to the great lawmen of the cattle towns, said to have been gifted by a dime novelist who wanted his heroes armed like no one else. Whether the story was true hardly mattered. Cattleman wanted one anyway. The extra barrel gave real reach, letting a man pick off a coyote or a rustler at a distance no ordinary 6-gun could touch, and some fitted a detachable stock to steady the shot. But the length made it a beast to draw and a nightmare to carry, and no working cowboy wore one on a cattle drive. It was a ranch gun, hauled out for varmints and bragging rights, and the men who owned one never stopped telling the story of where it came from. Number 14. The Remington Double Derringer was the smallest secret a Texas cattleman ever kept, a 2-shot pocket pistol that vanished in a vest and appeared only when everything had already gone wrong. Chambered for a fat, slow cartridge, it was useless past a card table's width, but at that range it was final. Gamblers, trail bosses, and cattle buyers carried them into towns that banned belt guns, because a marshal patting a man down often missed the little iron slab tucked behind a watch chain. By the 1870s, it was the most quietly common gun in Texas, owned by men who would swear on the Bible they went unarmed. Its 2 barrels stacked one atop the other, and a man got 2 chances and no more. Ranchers kept theirs against the night a stranger turned mean under the shed lantern. Every cattle town outlawed the concealed gun, and every cattleman carried one anyway, small enough to swear it wasn't there. Number 13. The Trapdoor. Springfield was the government's cast-off that became the ranch's watchdog, a single-shot rifle that hinged open at the breech to swallow a long .45-70 cartridge. When the Army traded up, surplus trapdoors flooded into Texas cheap, and by the late 1870s, no self-respecting outfit lacked one. It fired only once before reloading, but that one shot carried farther and hit harder than any repeater on the range, dropping a raiding wolf or a rustler's mount at distances the Winchester men could only dream of. Cattleman kept it for the long reach, the gun that guarded a waterhole or covered a fence line from a ridge. Cowboys mocked its slow, deliberate action, then went quiet when a trapdoor man made a shot no one else could. It was too long and too loud for any town, so it lived in the shed, leaned in a corner, the ranch's one honest rifle for when distance was the whole of the fight. Number 12. The Colt Lightning and its bigger brother, the Thunderer, were Colt's gamble on the double-action revolver, guns that fired with a single long pull of the trigger and never needed the thumb to cock them. Cattlemen of the early 1880s were split down the middle. The young hands loved the speed, spraying shots as fast as a finger could work. The old hands cursed the mushy trigger and swore they couldn't hit a barn from inside it. Chambered in a lighter cartridge than the Peacemaker, the Lightning was quick but soft, and men who trusted their lives to it sometimes wished for one heavy round instead of 6 fast ones. Still, gamblers and gunmen favored the double-action edge, and the ranchers who carried one felt modern doing it. So the Lightning came home, its temperamental works oiled against the shed dust, a fast gun for men who'd learned to forgive its faults. Number 11. The Winchester Model. 1866. Yellow Boy earned its name from the golden gleam of its brass frame, a repeating rifle so beautiful that men bought it for the shine before they ever fired it. It was the first true Winchester, feeding cartridges through a side gate and levering 15 rounds downrange without a pause to reload. On the cattle drives of the late 1860s, it was a marvel, the gun that let a small crew hold off a large raid. The brass frame drew the eye and the sun both, and old drovers joked that a Yellow Boy could blind a rustler as easily as shoot him. Its cartridge was light, better for varmints and men than for buffalo, but on the trail that was often exactly enough. Ranchers polished them like trophies and hid them like treasure. When a cattle town demanded every long gun be checked, the Yellow Boy went home wrapped in flannel, too pretty and too precious to leave hanging where a stranger might covet it. Number 10. The Remington New Model Army was the cap and ball revolver that outlasted its era, a solid frame 6-gun that soldiers carried through the Civil War and cowboys carried long after. Its top strap made it sturdier than the open-frame Colts, and a man could swap a spent cylinder for a loaded one in seconds, the closest thing to a fast reload the percussion age offered. When metallic cartridges arrived in the 1870s, gunsmiths bored the old Remingtons to take them, and thousands of these converted revolvers rode Texas ranges for another decade. Thrifty cattlemen loved that a gun bought in 1863 could still earn its keep in 1878. The powder and ball loading was slow and fickle in wet weather, and younger hands mocked the old iron. But it never failed a man who cared for it. Cattle towns banned it with the rest, so the Remington came home to the shed, a war relic still standing guard over a peacetime herd. Number 9. The Colt. 1851 Navy was the gunfighter's favorite before the cartridge revolver, a slim, balanced cap-and-ball 6-gun that pointed like an extension of the hand. Its silver-gray steel and octagonal barrel made it the most graceful revolver of its age, and the men who mastered it swore nothing since had ever felt so right. Texas Rangers carried navies into the border fights, And when those men turned to cattle, the Navy came with them. By the 1870s, it was old technology, its loose powder and percussion caps a chore beside the new metallic rounds. But old shootists trusted their lives to the gun that had never let them down, and a converted Navy firing cartridges bridged the two worlds neatly. Cattlemen kept theirs for sentiment as much as defense. When the town marshal called for every sidearm, the Navy went home to the shed, an aging master's tool, still deadly in a steady old hand. Number 8. The Smith & Wesson Schofield was the cavalry officer's revolver that Cattleman coveted, a top-break .45 caliber designed so a man could reload from horseback with one hand. The Army adopted it, then let thousands slip into civilian hands, and the Texas Range snapped them up. Its great virtue was speed. Flip the latch, break the frame, and 6 empties flew clear at once, ready for a fresh load, while a Colt man was still working his ejector rod. Outlaws prized it for the same reason lawmen did, and its reputation grew dark alongside its usefulness. The Schofield's shorter cartridge wouldn't chamber in a Colt, which caused endless grief on the trail when a man grabbed the wrong ammunition in the dark. Still, for a cattleman who valued a fast reload over everything, nothing beat it. Cattle towns confiscated Schofields as fast as any other belt gun. So it came home to the saddle shed, broken open and gleaming, the fastest loader in the West. Number 7. The Remington model. 1875 was the honest challenger to Colt's Crown, a single-action revolver built solid enough to survive anything a Texas ranch could throw at it. Remington gave it a heavy web of steel beneath the barrel, and cattlemen who bought one bragged it could be dropped, kicked, and buried in trail dust and still fire true. It never sold like the Peacemaker. Colt had the name and the legend, but the men who carried a Remington were fiercely loyal, insisting it was the better-made gun by any measure that mattered. It chambered the same big cartridges, hit just as hard, and cost a few dollars less. Some famous outlaws favored it, which did its reputation no favors with the law. So the Remington rode home to the shed, the underdog's iron, plainer than the Peacemaker, and prouder for it. Number 6. The Sharps was the Buffalo gun, a single-shot rifle so powerful it could knock a bull bison flat at ranges that beggared belief. Hunters called the big Sharps the gun that could shoot today and kill tomorrow, and the cattlemen who kept one used it for the same brute reach. On the wide Texas range, where a rustler might sit his horse a quarter-mile off and feel safe, the Sharps erased that safety. It fired one enormous cartridge, then had to be reloaded by hand, but a man who could shoot rarely needed 2. The recoil bruised shoulders, and the report rolled across the prairie like thunder. By the late 1870s, the great buffalo herds were gone, but the rifles remained, passed to sons who turned them on wolves and thieves. No town would let a man carry such a cannon down its street. So the Sharps stood in the shed, the longest arm a cattleman owned, waiting for the shot no other gun could make. Number 5. The Henry rifle was the repeater that terrified the frontier before the Winchester ever existed. A lever gun that fed 16 rounds and fired them fast enough that Confederate soldiers called it the rifle you loaded on Sunday and shot all week. When the war ended, Henrys flowed into Texas with the veterans, and the cattle outfits that got one held an advantage bordering on unfair. A single Henry could break a raid that outnumbered it 10-1, its rate of fire turning shadows into panic. The brass frame and open magazine slot marked it instantly, and men who saw a Henry raised often chose not to test it. Its weakness was that open magazine, dust, and grit fouled it on the trail, and a dirty Henry could jam at the worst moment. Cattlemen cleaned them like sacred things and kept them hidden because a gun that valuable drew thieves and marshals alike. It hung in the shed, the ranch's iron trump card. Number 4. The Winchester Model 1892 was the cowboy's rifle perfected, lighter and slicker than anything before it, chambering the same cartridges as a man's six-gun, so he carried one kind of ammunition for both. That single fact made it the darling of the working range. A cattleman could fill his belt once and feed his rifle and his revolver from the same loops. It levered smooth as water, held more than a dozen rounds, and stood up to trail abuse that would have wrecked a lesser gun. By the 1890s, the 92 was everywhere. Longhorns still walked, slung on saddles from the Panhandle to the Rio Grande. Its light frame couldn't handle the biggest buffalo loads, but for wolves, rustlers, and everyday range work, it had no equal. Towns that banned the long gun banned the 92, though few cowboys ever willingly parted with it. So it came home to the shed, the most practical rifle Texas ever carried, oiled and ready before dawn. Number 3. The sawed-off coach gun was the most feared iron on the Texas range, a double-barreled shotgun cut down until it was all blast and no mercy. Stagecoach guards rode with them, express messengers cradled them, and the cattleman who kept one in the shed knew exactly what it was for. The close, ugly fight no six-gun could win. At the length of a saloon or the width of a barn door, 2 barrels of buckshot ended any argument before it started. Men who feared nothing on the belt still went pale facing the twin muzzles of a scattergun. Texas Rangers hated it because it was the outlaw's favorite for exactly the same reasons the honest man loved it. And one Ranger captain was said to have ordered every cut-down shotgun in his county confiscated on sight. So the coach gun lived hidden, buried in the tack, the ranch's last word in a language everyone understood and no lawman wanted to hear. Number 2. The Winchester Model. 1873 was the gun that won the West, the repeating rifle so common and so beloved that its name became a byword for the frontier itself. It fired a stout cartridge, levered fast, and, like the 92 that followed, shared its ammunition with the Colt on a man's hip, though it came first and carried the legend. On the great cattle drives of the 1870s and 1880s, the 73 was the constant companion, slung on every chuck wagon and saddle, the gun a cowboy trusted against everything the trail could throw at him. Winchester even sorted the most accurate barrels into a premium grade, 1 of 1,000, and a man who owned one was rich in more than money. It defended the herd, filled the pot, and settled disputes the law never heard about. Every cattle town demanded it be checked at the line. So the 73 came home to the shed, the rifle that shaped Texas, hidden but never far from reach. Number 1. The Colt Single-Action Army, the Peacemaker, was the gun the whole frontier was measured against. The six-shooter nearly every Texas cattleman kept. From 1873, it defined the holster, a solid single-action .45 caliber pistol that balanced perfectly, hit like a mule, and forgave the dust, rain, and rough handling of a life spent horseback. Cowboys called it the equalizer, because in a man's hand it made no difference how big or fast his rival was. It loaded through a gate one round at a time and cocked with the thumb, deliberate and sure, and the men who mastered it did things that passed into legend. Every cattle town in Texas ordered the peacemaker checked at the boundary, and the famous gunfights of the age were often fought over exactly that command. So the cattleman surrendered his in town and kept his real one in the shed. It was the gun that tamed the range, the gun that started the fights, and the gun a Texas cattleman was buried with. Nothing before or since ever earned its place quite the same. There they are, 25 outlawed guns the Texas cattleman kept hidden in the saddle shed, from the doomed Volcanic all the way up to the peacemaker that ruled them all. Which one would you have kept behind your tack? Tell me in the comments, and let me know how many your own family once had. If this brought a little of the old range back to life, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next ride.